So Megan, tell us about your life growing up.
So I wasn't brought up a Christian. My family weren't Christians, my friends weren't Christians. To be honest, I didn't know many Christians. But I did go to a Catholic primary school and Catholic high school. And so through that, I did learn quite a bit about God. But the things that I was told scared me. So I was told a lot about different rules in the Bible that I absolutely have to follow. It all scared me. And I think growing up, I was 50-50 on whether I believed in God. And I think the more rational side of me was like, no, it's all nonsense. But the other part of me was like, but there must be something more. And to me, that something more was a scary, abstract thing. It was either a man sitting on a cloud, you know, like classic Father Christmas, or it was like this dark spirit that was just everywhere, and that terrified me.
And then you had this like amazing experience one day in the middle of Blackburn. Tell us about that.
Yes, I'm from Blackburn.
Yeah.
So one day I was just in town. I was going for a really tough time, and that day I felt really heavy and I didn't know what to do with that heaviness. And I wanted to cry, but I didn't want to be that person that was like crying in the middle of the town centre. And I found myself going into Blackburn Cathedral. I think it's because it was quiet. It's a lovely like big building, and there was no one around. So I went in and I sat down, and I could tell you like where I was sat, I could tell you what I was looking at. And as soon as I sat down, I just like sobbed. And I think it was like months, if not years worth of like emotion just coming out. There was something about that space that just made me feel free to express that emotion. I don't remember saying much other than saying I'm sorry to God, like over and over again, just like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did just walk out eventually, and I didn't really give it a second thought until a couple of years later.
So then how did you end up here? How did you end up at the Minster? How did that all come about?
Yes, so I went to college just down the road, Cardinal Newman College, and I met a girl there called Phoebe. And it's a really cool story actually, because I was never meant to meet Phoebe because I redid a year at college. So me and Phoebe should never have been in college at the same time, but coincidentally and because of circumstances we were. And I remember I was sat down in my seat and I was like, oh, look at everyone. And then Phoebe came and sat next to me and she was like, can I sit here? And I was like, yeah, of course, of course. And I remember like quite quickly we became good friends, and you know, she became someone I could really trust. One day in November, I remember saying to Phoebe like, oh, could we meet up? And she was like, oh, I can't tonight, I've got my youth group. Then she was like, why don't you come? And at first I was a bit like, it's a church thing. I don't want to be like told all these bad things and like be judged, and so I was very like skeptical of going, but I thought, why not? What have I got to lose? So I went that night to my first ever Minster Youth.
Wow. So what happened when you arrived?
Well, it was quite a small group. There was 3 leaders there, so there was Beth, Jo and Rachel. I just remember straight away like I gravitated towards Beth. She was just like this really calming presence, and Jo just had this amazing sense of humour, and Rachel was just Rachel. She was like, what's your favourite colour? And I just remember like when Rachel was asking me these questions, I was like, she's actually interested. Like, she's not just asking me what my favourite colour is because it's a way of small talk. Like, someone was actually interested in me and like what my interests were, and that meant like so much to me. So yeah, I continued to go to Minster Youth for a few weeks, and then Beth one week was like, why don't you come to church on Sunday? And I was like, okay. And off I went.
And so what was the story from there then? Like, what happened next?
So I remember the first time I walked into church on a Sunday. I remember everyone was singing, and some people like had their hands in the air, some people were kneeling, some people were like clapping and dancing, and everyone seemed to know the words to these songs, and you know, they were all about God. Like, going to a Catholic school, I was used to like hymns, like very much like stand up, sit down. And I just remember thinking, what the heck? I just remember there was like a live band. I was like, this is amazing. What I really remember is just everyone singing in unison. I was like, they're doing this for a reason. This isn't just a bunch of people like, you know, singing because they like singing. Like, something was going on in that space. And I was curious about that. And I remained curious about that for a good 2 years.
And so as you started coming to all these things more regularly, what did you see happening in your life?
So I think there was two main things really. So the first thing is I started seeing a lot of coincidences in my life. I've got one story in particular where there was a talk here about forgiveness, and the speaker was like challenging us to reach out to someone who you've maybe not spoken in a while due to like past issues. I remember during like the prayer time I was like, oh, I'm not like brave enough to like send that message. But then I like walked out the building, I turned my phone on, had a message from her being like, I've been thinking about you, like I think we should like draw a line, like move on. And you know, we were able to move on from that. And that, if that's not a coincidence, I don't know what is. I think that was an answered prayer. And yeah, and the second thing was like just the community. I really started to feel like I was part of this community, and I think at the time I was invited to church, luckily it was Phoebe that I was sat next to, but equally it could have been someone from like a gang, and they could have been like, oh, do you want to come out and hang out with me and my mates? And all I wanted at that time was to feel like I belonged somewhere, and if they'd have made me feel like that, I would have gone off with this gang, and who knows where my life would have been now. So yeah, I'm so glad that the community I joined was a community that uplifts me and that cheers me on, and yeah, that helped me grow in faith.
And so you made quite a drastic life decision of like what you're going to do with your next year after that. Tell us about that.
When I finished college, I felt like it was the right time to get baptised. There was a lot of things going on in my life at that point that just kind of really led me to Jesus. And one of the things that, you know, led me to decide that I want to follow Jesus was I was on the phone to Beth, who was my youth leader at the time, and I remember she said to me, Megan, in the same way that it's an absolute truth that your name is Megan, it's an absolute truth that you are loved, yeah, that God loves you. And that was like a penny dropping moment. I was like, well, I'm Megan, so if that's a fact, and Beth says it's also a fact that God loves me, like it just completed everything in my brain. So I got baptised. At the same time, I was doing my A-level dance exam, and I choreographed my dance about my faith journey, which really helped me like in worship. And then I decided to do the LDY, the Leadership Development Year. I don't want to say I left the Minster, because I don't think I ever left, but I joined the St Luke's Blackburn team.
Amazing. So you were there, the plan that came out of us, you were part of that team from day one.
Yeah.
Developing as a leader, but also serving loads. And of course, ended up back in Blackburn.
Yes.
So tell us about that.
So yes, so I went back to Blackburn. Our offices were actually located at the cathedral. So the place where I had my first conversation with God was then the place that I was like every day, like exploring my faith. And I found myself going into that cathedral multiple times, and multiple times I cried. Sometimes I shouted, sometimes I like sang, sometimes I was laughing. It became my safe space. I remember doing like street evangelism outside the cathedral, and I met a man whilst I was on street team, and we were speaking to him for about 45 minutes. He was talking to us about how he'd just come out of prison, and then we were talking to him for a while, and we was like, oh, come to church, and he was like, And then a couple of weeks later he came to church, and that's the conversation I had outside the cathedral. So I think it's amazing that I had my experience at the cathedral where I was looking for that sense of hope, and then 2 years later I had a conversation that hopefully led someone else to finding that little bit of hope as well.
And now you've gone off to Lancaster. Tell us about that.
Yes, so I stuck around at SLB St Luke's for a while, and again, like Preston Minster, I don't think I ever really left, but a job opportunity came up in St Thomas's in Lancaster, so I am now the assistant youth minister there, which again feels like a full circle moment, because I would say that my youth worker was a very significant part in my faith story. It's like I can be that person that kind of helps people find their path in faith.
So if you could sum up the difference in your life from before knowing Jesus to now, what would you say is the difference he's made in your life?
So it's really interesting actually, because I have a picture on my phone, and it was taken the day before I decided to become a Christian. And my friend took it spontaneously, and we was on a walk, and I was just walking like on the grass, and behind me it was just shade, so the grass and the leaves were like very dark. And then I was just stepping in to this like where the sun was shining on the grass, so the grass was like really green, it was light. And ahead, it was still shaded, but it wasn't as dark as it was behind me. And I suppose that kind of speaks to me what life is like now that I know Jesus. When I decided to become a Christian, I stepped out of the darkness and stepped into a life of light. At the beginning, I was probably like, oh, I'm a Christian now, bad things don't happen. Whereas now that I've kind of matured in faith a bit, I understand that there will still be bad things in my life. You know, I might not have experienced my worst days yet, but the shade ahead of me, it was dark in this picture, but it wasn't pitch black. There'll always be that sense of light, and that's what Jesus is to me. And I often think of him as like a brother, you know, like everything a brother should be. And when I'm driving in my car, I like imagine that Jesus is sat next to me, and that it's just like I'm having a car journey with a brother, and I'm like listening to music, I'm like chatting about my day, and like, should we go and get a coffee? But that like helps me like build a relationship with him. And like I was saying at the beginning, you know, like before I became a Christian, before I came to the Minster, God was this scary abstract thing for me and like a man on a cloud. So like imagining him as a brother, and you know, someone I can have a laugh with, someone that I can share secrets with, and like everything a brother should be, like that's helped me build a relationship with Jesus.